I'm Rachel.
And I'm Leah.
And this is Hashtag History,
the podcast for both history nerds and history haters alike,
where we dive into history's greatest stories of controversy, conspiracy, and corruption. Hello, and welcome back to Hashtag History. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries.
Ooh.
You know how I love a good mystery, and I know you do too.
Yes.
So, like I said, it is one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries. And by old, I do mean old. This incident occurred between the years 1585 and 1590. So to set some context as to just how old this incident was, remember that the first permanent English colony, which was called, Leah, I'm going to test your History 101 knowledge here.
Oh,
you remember?
Jesus.
You know.
No, I don't.
The first permanent English colony, you know it.
I know they came over on the Mayflower.
Dude,
is that right?
You're laying the foundation here.
Okay.
It starts with J.
It starts with a what, huh?
J.
I don't know.
Okay. Thank God we're studying this right now. The very first permanent English colony was called Jamestown.
Duh.
So, duh. Yes,
Pocahontas, but man.
There you go. See, now you know.
Now
setting context, Jamestown was not established until 1607. So that tells you just how old this incident is. When you learn about American history, starting with the colonial era, most people are taught that Jamestown was the start of it. Most people have never even heard of the colony of Roanoke and have no idea that the colonial era actually started over 20 years before the Jamestown settlers arrived. So why are we not taught about the Roanoke colony? We'll get into that shortly, but for now, I'm going to hand it back off to you, Leah, for this week's cocktail segment.
Yeah, my favorite time.
I'm excited.
So let me start off by saying, Rachel, that it was incredibly hard to pick a fitting cocktail for this topic. There is a cocktail that I found called the Roanoke, but it sounded really difficult to make. And I think it involved like egg whites and other obscure stuff. Yeah. I just figured that's out of our wheelhouse. So then I started looking into colonial times cocktails, but most of those were like invented or popularized way later, like the 1700s.
Oh.
So I landed on instead, drum roll. Mead.
Mead.
Yes, mead.
Which I have mead here in front of me.
Yes.
And I feel like maybe I feel old-timey. No, how I feel is maybe I shouldn't continue like I did last week saying that cocktail looked like NyQuil. Maybe I shouldn't keep going with that trend of describing them. And yes,
it looks like a jar
exactly,
of pee. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, and I actually, when I came home with it last night, I told Alex, I'm like, this is a jar of my urine. And he was like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, no, it's not really, you weirdo.
Yeah, that was my first thought too, is it looks a little urine-y, but so I know it isn't technically a cocktail, but I wanted to pick something at least semi-period appropriate, and I also just so happen to have a weird roommate who makes mead. like he actually like has bottles of mead stashed all over the house, like in the bottom of closets and stuff. It's really crazy. So for those of you who are wondering what the hell mead actually is, it is an alcoholic beverage. It's created by fermenting honey with water and sometimes adding various fruits and spices. So this one doesn't have any fruits in it. It's literally just honey and water.
I'm still totally excited.
So it's kind of like beer, but a little bit sweeter. And because it's so easy to make, you take some yeast, you add a shit ton of honey and water, and then you ferment it for like, I think they say a minimum of 4 months. it's totally possible that Roanoke Colony or other colonies like it later on made and drank mead in their time. In fact, most people drank more alcohol than they did water during this time period, simply due to the fact that water was dangerous to drink.
Yes.
So, yeah, look at me knowing my history.
I'm like massively impressed.
Some historians even estimate that colonists drank 80% more alcohol than the average American does today.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so some fun mead facts for our tasting here. So it was made as far back as 7000 BC.
Wow.
Yeah, they found like remnants of it in some like Chinese pottery that dated back to that time. It's referred to as the nectar of the gods, or it was referred to as the nectar of the gods by ancient Greeks. And it was believed to be dew sent from the heavens and collected by bees. And the origin of the term honeymoon harks back to the medieval tradition of drinking honey wine, aka mead, for a full moon cycle after a new marriage. Supposedly, it was good for fertility.
How cool.
Yes.
That is so cool. It makes this jar of urine like look so much better and more exciting.
Well, I'm glad. So drink up. Let me know what you think.
This is my first time ever trying mead.
I've actually had quite a bit of it because Richard's a weirdo.
Hold on. Okay.
Okay.
I think I like it.
Yeah?
I think this tastes like something that could really mess you up. No?
Yeah, absolutely. So I drank like a jar full like of what you had, the amount that I gave you. Mm-hmm. And I was like feeling buzzed off of that.
Walking
like
sideways a little bit?
Yeah, good buzz, yeah.
Okay, so by the end of this segment or this episode, and hopefully the end of this drink. Yeah, exactly. So no guarantees about how this episode's going to end.
Right.
But I like it. I definitely like it more than last week's cocktail.
Yeah, me too.
I like this one. All right. Well, thank you, Leah, and thank you, Leah's weird roommate, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so going back to Roanoke, why don't we learn about Roanoke in grade school? Simply put, it's because it's just one big mystery, and there are unfortunately more questions than there are answers. The very first English settlers came here in August of 1587 and established the colony of Roanoke, only to completely disappear without a trace by August of 1590. When John White, the governor of the new Roanoke colony, returned to Roanoke after close to 3 years overseas, he returned to find no trace whatsoever of not only the colonist, but of the colony itself. The only clue left behind was the word Croatoan, which had been carved into a fence post, and the 3 letters C-R-O, so crow, carved into a tree. And Leah, I have sent a couple of these pictures over to you to show the markings. Mm-hmm. If you look at the picture that's titled Croatoan, you can tell that's obviously an artist's depiction of the event, because sadly we have no pictures of that fence post. Also note that although in the picture Croatoan is written on a tree, that was not actually the case. It's Croatoan that was written on the fence post, while the letters C-R-O were the ones written on a tree, which super cool. There is a picture, if you look in there, titled Crow. There is a picture of the actual tree, and it has been preserved now for hundreds of years for tourists and history nerds like you and me to go check out. Isn't that cool?
I figured that was just like a fake thing, but it's the real thing.
No, that one is the real deal. Super cool. So let's start at the beginning. And every time I say that, let's start at the beginning, do you know what I'm about to say about Sound of Music?
Yes.
That song where let's start at the beginning. A very good place to start. Every time I say that, I think of Julie Andrews. So starting at the beginning, like I mentioned earlier, Roanoke was England's very first attempt at settlement in the New World, North America. Roanoke was established in what is now Dare County, North Carolina. When it was first established in August of 1585, there was a severe lack of supplies. Additionally, there was rising tension with the local Native Americans. This resulted in several of the colonists returning to England within a year and a new wave of settlers coming in. To be exact, there were now 115 Roanoke inhabitants. One of those 115 inhabitants was Virginia Dare, who is, you may have heard the name before because she's infamous, as she was the very first English baby born in America on August 18th, 1587, which is really super cool. And also, isn't Virginia Dare like such a power name? Like, I kind of am reconsidering now any potential future daughter names that I had in my mind, because Virginia Dare is pretty badass. So Virginia Dare, she was actually the granddaughter of John White, whom I mentioned earlier was the governor of Roanoke. There's an infamous picture of Virginia Dare that was created by an artist to depict her baptism, which, Leah, I've sent that picture over to you too. As you all know from our old history textbooks, all those early pictures are just artist depictions. So it's neat to look at for some context, but don't put too much weight into those pictures and how realistic they may or may not be. So White determined pretty early on that the colony was going to need government assistance if they were going to survive. In late 1587, so not long after Virginia was born, White left his wife, daughter, and his new grandbaby and returned to England to get some help. But he ended up getting stuck there in England for 3 years. So he was stuck there until August of 1590 due to the Anglo-Spanish War, which, this is a side note, but we're talking about history anyway, so why wouldn't I talk about this? Just a quick recap on the Anglo-Spanish War. This was the naval war that broke out between England and Spain in 1585. And Queen Elizabeth I, she needed every available ship in order to challenge the Spanish Armada. Thus, White had to remain in England for 3 years because there were no available ships to return to Roanoke. It wasn't until he returned to Roanoke in August of 1590 that he found a ghost town and the post carving of the word Croatoan and the tree etching of crow. It was known that relations with the local Native Americans weren't great. Some of the earlier Roanoke settlers, you know, those men that had left a year after the establishment, they had been involved in a horrible incident in which they sacked and burned a nearby Native American village because, you know, that's totally necessary.
Yeah, totally.
In his short amount of time in Roanoke, Governor White attempted to reestablish the settlers' relationship with the local tribes, but many of them, still remembering what had happened years before, refused to meet with him. To further evidence just how bad the colonist-Native American relations were, there was an incident involving a colonist named George Howe in which he was killed by Native Americans while he was out searching for crabs all alone in an act of retaliation. There is some writing from the time by a Thomas Harriot, who was one of the colonists, that it survived the ages, and it suggests that perhaps relations with the neighboring Native Americans wasn't all that bad after all. It's important to note, though, that these writings were in the form of what I would call a progress report, which had been written upon the request of the English government. So obviously he knows his audience and what kind of message he's trying to deliver to them. This report was also to serve as propaganda for the colony. So if Harriet had mentioned poor relations with the local Native Americans, clearly Roanoke would never gain new settlers, which of course defeats the purpose of propaganda. Mm-hmm. So it's neither here nor there. You can decide what you think as far as the truthful circumstances of Roanoke relations with the Native Americans really was. Remember how I said this case is more questions than answers? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, get ready because we're about to hit even more questions. So the majority opinion is that relations were bad between the two people. Therefore, it's not a far stretch for most people that have attempted to solve this case to believe that the English colonists were killed by local Native Americans, especially since Croatoan, that word that was written on the fence post, Croatoan was also the name of a Native American tribe that lived on Croatoan Island just south of Roanoke. So is it possible that the Native American tribe massacred the Roanoke people and then etched their name into a fence post as a means of marking what they had done? That's one of the theories.
Mm-hmm.
So White, however, believed the Croatoan etching might have been a clue that the colonists had willingly moved to the Croatoan island. Like I said, it was literally as if no one had ever even lived there. Even the houses and other structures they had built were gone.
Oh.
Which, isn't that so fascinating? He literally returned to nothing.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, nothing. So this could possibly suggest that their departure from Roanoke hadn't exactly been forced or rushed if they were able to deconstruct the buildings and stuff that they had built.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, White had actually had a conversation with the colonist before his departure back to England, in which they had actually already made an agreement that if the colonists moved in his absence, that they would indicate as such by writing it into a tree, and they would also include the marking of a Maltese cross alongside the message to indicate if the move had been forced. And then, Leah, I have sent over a picture of a Maltese cross for you to look at and describe for our listeners.
It kind of is like the cross, no pun intended, a cross between a cross, like your average cross, and a four-leaf clover. I don't know. Yeah. It's kind of like pointy, has four little sides to it. That's all I got.
When I grabbed the picture for you to describe, I was like, thank God it's not me trying to describe this thing.
Yeah.
Good luck. Sorry. So, but you got it. That is how I would also describe a Maltese cross. And Maltese crosses, they were a super common symbol in the 16th century. And since White did not see this cross etched anywhere, he chose to believe that the Roanoke colonists had willingly moved to the Croatoan island. One of my absolute favorite things about history is recognizing that these were all very real people with very real emotions. Whenever I read history, I always do my best to put myself in their shoes and try to envision these events happening to me, as opposed to just reading facts and regurgitating them into a research paper, which I know we all did in school. But when I really put myself in White's shoes here, I can only imagine how he must have felt. He left his wife, daughter, and granddaughter on this foreign island while he went back home to do what he could to save them, but then didn't return for another 3 years. So of course it is White's belief and his desperate hope that because there's no etching of the cross, that his family and all of the other colonists were safe and willingly relocated for a better life. Speaking of all of that, though, can you even imagine the way his family must have felt? Like your husband, dad, granddad literally leaves you in a foreign land with no food, no supplies. He returns to your home country where you are comfortable and then never returns.
Yeah. 3 years. Like after year one goes by, I'd probably start like a voodoo doll of him.
100%. Like, thanks a lot, Dad.
Yeah.
So we'll never know exactly what happened. White did attempt to conduct a search those years later when he returned, but the men that brought him back to Roanoke, they refused to stay any longer. There was a huge storm coming in, and so they bounced. There were a couple of attempted investigations into what happened at Roanoke in 1602 and 1603, which if you're doing the math, that is 12 and 13 years later. But neither of those investigations were successful either. The first real, and I use air quotes when I say real, the first real information England received about what possibly happened to Roanoke comes from none other than, drumroll, Captain John Smith.
Oh.
Everyone knows who John Smith was, even if only because of Disney's Pocahontas movie, which I don't want to reveal any secrets. I guess I will.
Okay.
Basically, just know that we are massively in the works of producing an episode about the real story of John Smith and Pocahontas, because Disney, they got it all kinds of wrong. I'm not mad, though, because without Disney, we wouldn't have Colors of the Wind.
Right, which is my all-time go-to song.
100%. So Disney, no hard feelings. We will be coming out with an episode later talking about everything you did wrong, though. Okay, moving on anyway. So John Smith reports that sometime around 1607 and the establishment of Jamestown, he was able to extract information from Chief Powhatan, the leader of an alliance of Native Americans living in Virginia at the time of the Jamestown settlement. I'll go into this at great lengths in that John Smith Pocahontas episode, but John Smith was pretty notorious for over-exaggerating and even fabricating many of his stories and experiences. Anyway, Smith says he learned from Powhatan that Powhatan had been personally responsible for ordering the slaughter of the Roanoke colonists. His reasoning for demanding such an order is because, according to him, the Roanoke colonists were living with Chespians, and that was a tribe that had refused to merge with Powhatan. There is actually a second source that confirms Smith's account. William Strachey, secretary for Jamestown from 1610 to 1611, he wrote that he had learned that the Roanoke colony had merged with a group of natives and had been living there with them for 20-some years before Powhatan had them massacred. Powhatan had ordered the slaughter as he had had a prophecy that one day he would be overthrown by them. The overwhelming belief is indeed that the Roanoke colony was killed by Native Americans. But it's important to note that there has never once been any archaeological evidence of this, nor have any bodies ever been found. Additionally, it is entirely possible that the Roanoke massacre that Powhatan supposedly ordered, that could have been against that first wave of Roanoke settlers that had major issues with the local Native American tribes, and that it was not against that new wave that had the 115 inhabitants. Another theory that was brought forward by John Lawson in his 1709 book titled A New Voyage to Carolina suggests that Croatans actually lived in Roanoke and claimed to have white ancestors. Leah, I have an excerpt of his book here for you to read. You'll see that it's all written in Old English. So,
oh God.
Good luck with reading it. And also, can I make a special request that you likewise do it in a British accent?
I don't know. I'll try.
I believe in you.
I don't. Okay. Actually, no. A farther confirmation of this we have from the Hatteras Indians, who either lived on Roanoke Island or much frequented it. These tell us that several of their ancestors were white people and could talk in a book as we do, the truth of which is confirmed by gray eyes being found frequently amongst these Indians and no others. They value themselves extremely for their affinity to English and are ready to do them all friendly offices. What? Okay.
Yeah.
It is probable that this settlement miscarried for want of timely supplies from England or through the treachery of the natives. For we may reasonably suppose that the English were forced to cohabit with them for relief and conversation, and that in process of time, they conformed themselves to the manner of their Indian relations. This is the part that I had heard before. It's like, where did they go? And then it was like, well, why are there these blue-eyed Indians walking around? They just,
yeah.
Okay.
So, and there were a handful of encounters that European colonists had with Native Americans over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries, in which they witnessed light-haired and light-eyed Native Americans. One particular encounter was with the Tuscaroras, which I looked that up to make sure I say it correctly. It is Tuscaroras. One particular encounter was with the Tuscaroras in 1969. Several of the Tuscaroras had light hair and light eyes. Since the nearest English colony to the Tuscarora was Jamestown, and there is no record of Jamestown having ever been attacked by the Tuscaroras, the likelihood of the Roanoke colony being their ancestors, it's highly probable. In the late 1800s, there was an article written in the Fayetteville Observer, which stated that descendants of the Tuscarora tribe had long told stories about their ancestors having friendly relations with the Roanoke colony, and having found them desperate and in need of resources, persuaded them to leave Roanoke Island and to join them. But as with all other theories and all other parts of this story, there is, again, no evidence of this. In fact, in 1998, an archaeological investigation was conducted into Roanoke, which, just a side note, but I love so much that over 400 years later, we're talking about 1998, over 400 years later, there are still people that are so intrigued and so determined to figure this unsolved mystery out. I just love that. And it makes me feel like I'm not alone in geeking out about this kind of stuff.
No,
anyway,
you're not alone.
So there was an archaeological investigation that was conducted at the ancient Croatoan capital, which was 50 miles from the Roanoke colony, which actually did end up producing quite a few really interesting artifacts. Archaeologists located what they said was a 10-karat gold 16th century English signet ring, gun flints, and 2 copper farthings, which, Leah, do you know what farthings are?
God, no. What the heck? It sounds like...
I didn't know either, so I looked it up. Farthings, they were an old type of like monetary unit that was used in England way back when. So the signet ring in particular, it bore the Kendall coat of arms, which you're familiar with what a coat of arms is.
Yes, it's like a family symbol, right?
Got it. And actually, my family has one. My
grandma, what?
Yeah, my grandma was a Stuart, and because you can have your own maid, you don't have to be royalty, although I'd like to pretend that we are, but you can have your own maid, and that's what she did. She had a coat of arms made for the Stuart family, and it has like a lion on it, and it's really cool. Yeah. Anyway, the ring was traced back to the Kendall coat of arms, like I said, and there was actually a Master Kendall that was recorded to have lived in Roanoke between 1585 and 1586. So that is super cool. But of course, even this story has holes in it. That ring that was apparently 10-karat gold, it was tested in April of 2017 and was found to be made of brass, and therefore it could not be dated back to the 16th century. There is another theory about what may have happened to the Roanoke colony. In 1998, again, a team was put together to review the tree rings of an 800-year-old cypress tree that was removed from Roanoke Island to determine what the temperature would have been like back then. Researchers ended up determining that from 1587 to 1589, so right when the Roanoke colonists were there, Roanoke Island had the worst drought in 800 years. And this drought lasted for 3 years. Not only did the Roanoke colonists have to figure out how to grow and produce food in a foreign land, but they had to figure out how to grow and produce food in a land that simply could not grow or produce food. This theory suggests that the colonists died of starvation rather than massacre or from moving elsewhere. But again, there were no bodies ever discovered, and so there is about as much evidential weight in this theory as there is with all the other theories. And of course, the final theory is, do you know what I'm about to say?
No, I don't.
Final theory, aliens. And that's that. That is the story of the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Sadly, over 400 years later, and we still have more questions than answers. This is something that I will forever keep my eyeball on and pray that we one day learn the true answer sometime before I die. You know, similarly to how I feel about keeping my eyeball on who in the world killed John Benet Ramsey or who killed Biggie Smalls. Do you have anything like that you're dying to know the answers to?
I don't think I'm as weird as you, Rachel, in that.
I'm just such a curious person that not knowing everything drives me insane. What's really cool, though, about Roanoke is that in 2007, a project was put together called the Lost Colony of Roanoke DNA Project, whose mission is to figure out what exactly happened at Roanoke by doing DNA testing. So that's really cool. But unfortunately, there have been no results located.
Dang it.
One other pretty neat thing I learned while conducting my research about Roanoke is that the people of North Carolina continue to commemorate and memorialize the Roanoke colonists by holding Roanoke festivals with music and outdoor theater and dancing. So, you know, just add that to my bucket list of places to go and things to do before I die. That's that. So what do you think? What's your theory?
You know, just based on the fact that there are some light-haired, blue-eyed, you know, natives walking around, I feel like they probably ended up like kind of assimilating into a nearby tribe. And yeah.
That's my theory too. Very closely tied with aliens. They're both like right there in line with each other. Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in and listening to this episode. We will be posting in the show notes links to all of the photos that were mentioned in the episode. If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and subscribe to #History on whatever podcast platform you use. Share it with a friend and give us a rate and review.
And don't forget to check us out on Instagram at #history_podcast.
Woohoo! Thank you.